So the biggest story, actually the biggest story this week, was this kind of hoo-ha, I don't know if I can use the word hoo-ha, with Air Services, which is the organisation that runs air traffic control, and whether or not they are or are not understaffed. Jake, you've been covering this. Talk us through this saga from the beginning.
Yeah, so Air Services has been having a bit of trouble for a while now. Last week, there was all sorts of palaver about airspace in southeast Queensland and in New South Wales being shut down because of what Air Services said was unplanned leave on the part of air traffic controllers. The union Civil Air has come back swinging. Civil Air is saying Air Services has been engaged. It's been causing this constant reliance on overtime. According to Civil Air, they say that Air Services does not have enough staff. Air Services insists that it has more than enough staff, but Civil Air is saying this is not the case. Civil Air has pointed out that in July 2021, there was this retirement incentive scheme offered to air traffic services staff. 138 employees took up the offer, at least 124 of whom were operational air traffic controllers. So in their statement, the union said this removed maybe 13.7% of Australia's air traffic controllers from rosters. And so they're saying that all this personal leave that the ATCs are taking is a result of removing workforce resilience, as well as traffic picking up earlier than expected, and this constant requirement for overtime.
One of the interesting things about this is there's a lot of kind of, I would argue, kind of PR mumbo-jumbo, a lot of smoke and mirrors here. So what's happening is that the airspace is being effectively, which is a crucial word, shut down. And so what that means is essentially the aircraft are talking to one another to make sure we don't crash into each other, rather than the person in the aircraft control tower giving them that kind of third-party information. And obviously, services can still operate, but it can cause delays. It can potentially cause cancellations because it's not the normal way of doing things. Now, Air Services are very adamant this is toward to, as Jake said, kind of short-term and unplanned leave. But it is not in any way due to an underlying lack of controllers. They say they have more than enough controllers to run their network. And I think off the top of my head, they're claiming that they need 800 to operate Australians' airspaces correctly, and they have 900. But in a sense, what they're saying is this problem is not due to a lack of controllers, it's due to a lack of controllers. Like, it's nonsense, because what they're saying, no, Jake, the rant is still continuing. It's still continuing. Go ahead. Right? What they're basically saying is these short-term one-off incidents, but obviously if they had more staff in the first place, then they would have staff to cover this problem. Am I right, Jake?
Yeah, so you are correct. In the number of air services, in the number of ATCs air services claiming, they are saying we need, this was from an official sort of statement by a spokesperson, they are saying they only need about 800 ATCs to fully staff the network. They have more than 900, and they say 97% of these are in operational roles. They are also saying, Air Services, that they're recruiting more than 50 ATC trainees nationwide over the next 3 months to add further depth to their rosters, and a total of 80 air traffic controllers are due in financial year 2024. Civil Air is saying this unplanned leave is not the problem, and that Air Services is shifting blame away from, quote, its lack of workplace planning and resource allocation. The union saying the airlines have failed to admit their own staff reductions have led to outages and industrial action that affect their services. Further, it is relevant to note that ATCs have a regulatory requirement not to work unless medically fit for duty. Data obtained by Civil Air, demonstrates a very clear shortfall in the number of required staff, with recorded overtime hours far exceeding the number of hours lost to unplanned leave. Covering unfilled shifts requires our members to work overtime and thus reduces the number of available staff to cover any subsequent personal leave taken. That is what Civil Air has said.
Chris?
Look, it's interesting, and I think it's pretty evident that Air Services are understaffed and underperforming. We've kind of seen it come out of the wash a bit more this week, with airlines starting to shift blame to Air Services rather than the cancellations being on the airlines. And I know that earlier this week we posted a story on the Australian Aviation page on our social channels about the runway delays at Sydney the other day when Sydney went down to one runway. Now, we had a number of pilots comment on that story saying, what wins? So Sydney Airport supposedly went down to one runway because of strong winds affecting Sydney. Now, where I was that day, there wasn't a gust of wind in sight. So it was interesting to read that Sydney Airport went down to one runway operation due to high winds. A number of pilots, though, commented on our story that we posted on social media saying, what wins? And one of them actually gave the wind speed when he landed 30 minutes before, saying it was a 14-knot crosswind. Now, that's not a high enough wind to force Sydney Airport into single runway operation, causing absolute gridlock and chaos. And supposedly, wind has shut the runway further as the weeks progress, just causing more chaos for holiday travellers. So there's clearly a problem. No one wants to admit there's a problem. Some of the airlines have come out and said, yes, we have a staffing issue, but we're working on that. But I don't think this time round the airlines are to blame for a staffing issue. I think there's a bigger problem here that we certainly need to rectify and fix.